Good morning. Winterview here with another brief dialogue as he drives his car to the shops. 20 minutes to explain the deep mysteries of the universe. Don't worry, I can do it. Today's subject for my dear friend Annastacey. Karma. We're going to tackle karma. Yes. The most puzzling, quixotic, strange, etc. As he runs out of words, he falls back to etc. of all spiritual concepts. Once again, caveat at the start. First, traffic noise. Noise of acceleration, to be precise. As I go up the hill in a 1.3 litre engine, you can hear the car asking me, "Really? We're doing this again?" Other caveat, goes without saying, all concepts and ideas discussed are just that, concepts, pointing towards something unsayable, unconceptualable. Probably a better word for that. Can't think of it. So, karma. The most basic understanding of karma, for most people, is the idea of some kind of cosmic payback for deeds done. If you do bad, bad will come back. If you do good, good will come back. If you do neutral, neutral comes back somehow. These are the kindergarten versions of karma. Good enough for the Sunday tabloids. But for us more sophisticated spiritual seekers who want to get their teeth into something a little bit more intellectual, this brief dialogue is for you. The basic idea, though, is in essence correct. Something will lead to something, or rather, something will apparently lead to something. Karma, in essence, is a concept designed to point to the consequence of something. And that something is thought, or conceptualization, or our concepts, if you prefer. You could look at karma as the payback for a simple cause and effect chain analysis. Nothing wrong with that. A fine definition, really. Stand in front of a oncoming truck and be prepared for karma to exact a punishing toll on such foolishness. Eat candy all day. What will happen? Karma will make you fat. Karma will give you diabetes. And so on. You see, nothing too esoteric really there. But what I wanted to talk about, moreover, are the ideas and concepts that we carry around that lead to an apparent consequence for the individual, or even the apparent individual. The topic is actually quite easy to grasp in many ways, but because our concepts are often hidden from view and complex and linked to other concepts, it's very difficult to know what karma we're inviting with our concepts if we're not even aware of our concepts in the first instance. But let's take a very simple example, an example that I give in talks occasionally, the example of racism. Good old-fashioned us against them, skin colour against skin colour racism. On the surface, a totally ridiculous concept. Judging someone by the colour of their skin. Perhaps there is an evolutionary basis for prejudice. However, the concept in and of itself is problematic. Rather, maybe not problematic, but if we look at it in terms of karma, we can see what the consequence of such a belief system might give rise to. So, we'll start with our imaginary blank slate tabula rasa human born into the world, no beliefs, no concepts. Of course, that's a total fantasy, but good for illustrative purposes. Then we take that child and we shape them into the man or woman they will become by imbuing them with belief systems through some kind of crazy indoctrination process. We tell them that people down the road with a different skin colour are not to be trusted. They are not worthy. They are somehow beneath us, etc. And form the basis of a skin colour or race-based conceptualization in the mind of that person. Now, what is the karma of such a belief system, you might ask? Good question. On the one hand, it might not have any impact at all. It could just be one of those benign, subtle, at the back of your mind beliefs that never really comes up very much in the day-to-day life because there's no people with a different skin colour around you. However, walk into a store or leave town or have a chance encounter with someone with a different skin colour, and suddenly the concepts flare up in the mind. Alarm, alert, danger, oh no, someone with a different skin colour, what am I to do? As you can see, the mind is agitated, annoyed, upset, cautious, untrusting, etc. Why? Only one reason. The concept. The concept has given rise to a whole series of thoughts and ideas about this person with a different skin colour. Now, you're subject to your own beliefs about them. You're feeling distress about their very presence. Second, you might take on a biased perspective on their behaviour. Perhaps they are double parked outside, and the mind imbues the race-based prejudice onto them for doing that. They did that because they're a different race. I would never do that type of behaviour. So the mind might say, any little error or any little problem will be magnified and ascribed to the race that they are. Then that will build and feed into the concept, giving the concept truth. We'll ignore and minimize anything nice or good about that person, lest it challenge our very concept. And so, what happens is eventually you polarize yourself away from that particular group of particular skin color, such that they decide to polarize themselves away from you because they sense or even experience your hostility. And now, that concept, seemingly innocent, has taken on a life of its own. Those people with the different skin colour really are douchebags. They're kind of ignoring me and they're being mean to me as well. I'm glad I had that concept in the first place, otherwise I might have fallen victim to their awfulness, etc., etc. So, you can see, without me extrapolating even further, the problems that concepts give rise to. You become subject to the consequence of your own conceptualizations. And it's not just true for the so-called bad conceptualizations like racism. We could choose a something that apparently seems positive. Let's choose being helpful. So, here we have another blank slate tabula rasa infant, and we imbue upon them very strong concepts of being good, or being helpful, being nice, etc. Almost got run off the road just by the way a few seconds back, but I'm okay. So, we take this blank slate infant, imbue them with being good as a concept. You must be good. And, of course, we can't just say be good. We have to codify it and structure it in a way that they know what that means. So we give them a whole list of stuff. You've got to always be polite and always smile and always talk in a friendly, non-threatening, neutral Swiss kind of voice and always be appeasing in conflict and help old ladies across the road, etc., etc., and so forth. Now, you end up with a person, as they grow up, who has these very strong ideas about being nice. And to the delight of people they encounter, a person is infallibly nice. They're always the one being helpful. They're always the one who just wants to go that extra mile just to make sure everyone's okay and that everything is good and fine according to their concepts. However, unfortunately, not everyone is going to find their brand of helpful. So, that's going to become a problem for the person who needs to be good by doing good deeds. They're going to come up against people who simply don't give a crap about their brand of help and might not even want it, and frankly might find it quite offensive that they're being offered help. What are you saying? Why do I need help? Are you calling me an idiot? And so on and so on. So now this desire built into the concepts of being helpful takes on a problematic flavor. And once again, we come back into a polarized mindset. This person, needing to maintain their concepts of I am a good person, will inevitably start to avoid situations that will deny the chance for them to be good or helpful. They will polarize themselves only into situations where their concepts can be nurtured and give life to goodness, etc. So this brings me to the next point. Without going further into that example, I think you get the idea. The next point is that all concepts, whatever they are, whether they're apparently good or apparently bad, will inevitably breed polarity at some point. That is, whatever the concept is, the opposite of that concept will feel uncomfortable. You will not like it. You will seek to escape it somehow. You can apply this to most reports in the newspaper every day. You can look at international conflicts and even see it go on there with ideas and concepts about national identity. This is who we are. This is who I am. This is what we do in this country, in this town, in this house, and so on and so forth. We become subject to the karma of our own concepts. In mental health, where I work day to day, I see this over and over and over again. People are slaves, you might say, or victims in a way, to their own concepts about the world. And in fact, a very famous psychiatrist, Aaron Beck, pointed this out many years ago when he said it's not so much the thoughts that people are having, it's the opinions or judgments about their thoughts. So, that brings me to the biggie, the big one of karma. The karma of the concept of being a person. Oh, I didn't really think about that one, did you? What is the karma of holding that concept? Well, very grave. Let's have a look. We take the most fundamental, basic concept that we have, that I exist, or I'm a person, or I'm an individual. That very fundamental, foundational concept. And yes, it is a concept, by the way. Now, as soon as that concept arises, I exist, what is the opposite, the polar opposite, or the corollary of that belief? Pretty obvious. I don't want to I don't want to not exist. I got a bit confused there. In essence, I don't want to die. So now, for the individual who is born and exists, They are terrified of death and dying. They do not want to die. So anything that threatens life, or what they perceive as life enriching, they will be averse to. They will run a mile. By the way, if you can hear a torrential downpour on the car, that's because there is a torrential downpour on the car. So I'm trying to speak up, keep it loud, keeping it real at the same time. Hope I'm doing a good job. The next thing is about this concept of the individual, is that it's because it's vulnerable to non-existence, so far as the concept would suggest, it needs to be defended. You need to defend yourself. That is, you need to protect yourself from death. So this leads to a whole range of very foundational behaviors of self-preservation. And there we see the rise of selfishness in humanity, the basis for it. Not so much because humans are somehow inherently flawed by their genetics, but rather because they think they exist as individuals, or a human thinks they exist as an individual, they feel vulnerable, fundamentally vulnerable. Existential angst is another way of putting that. The next part of karma, you might say, as a result of this concept, brings us to spirituality, where we are commonly come across this idea of ridding oneself of the self, if that's possible. We hear that the ego, which is the sort of notional concept for the self, is somehow problematic, and we ascribe problems associated with selfishness and unpleasant behavior to the fact that we have something called an ego. It's a little bit misguided in a way. It's actually just simply saying, because I believe I exist, I need to defend myself. And I've talked a little bit about the physical defenses, but there's also psychological defenses. Because you feel that you were born and that you have some kind of independent existence, then the next natural thought, as far as karma would go, is there must be a point to my existence. If I was born, there must be a reason. It's very hard to get out of that idea that there's no reason for an individual's birth. And when you get into that whole ball game, you're now talking about meaning and purpose. My life must have meaning. My life must have purpose if I was born. And then you get into something a little bit more pernicious. The person, the individual, now feels like they're on a journey, that they need to explore or find their meaning in life. And if they are on track with their meaning, then everything's fine and dandy. But as soon as life loses its meaning, guess what happens? Well, those of us who work in mental health know exactly what happens. Yes, depression and or anxiety, or both. Simply because they've lost meaning. And with the loss of meaning comes the loss of hope. And with the loss of hope comes the idea that this person has a problem or is problematic fundamentally. And the only solution the mind can come up with, and it's actually very logical, is to rid the self of the self, and that is to commit suicide. Now, funnily enough, that's actually a very good idea in one sense. Hold that thought, don't get excited about what I just said. I didn't mean go kill yourself. It means to examine more closely what is this self that I think is problematic, is actually the invitation, rather than taking this sledgehammer blow to the idea of the self, I will just kill myself. You can have a look at the concepts you have around yourself and see if they're true. And in fact, you can even see if the concept of being a self is true at all. Now, that requires a bit of skill and a bit of support. I wouldn't recommend doing that on your own if you have a mental health problem, by the way, just as an aside. Seek professional advice. So, this person, this apparent person we can now call them, because the self is conceptualized, has a series of problems. They need to be defensive on a physical level. They need to be defensive on a psychological, emotional level to protect and defend themselves. And then that brings up the problem of when it all goes to shit, you just want to get rid of the person. And that's actually the correct, in one sense, line of thinking. You need to get rid of that person. But in the spiritual perspective, instead of committing suicide, the spiritual seeker looks to try and examine the veracity of this concept of a person. And using so-called spiritual techniques, introspection, meditation, chanting, drugs, blah blah blah, they come to understand eventually, or so the thinking goes, that there actually is no self, or rather the self that they had thought existed is nothing more than a concept. And that brings us to this, back to this thing called realization or liberation. And that is, in essence, what the scriptures or what the reports of liberation are really saying. It's the death of the person, the death of the individual, not bodily, physically death, but death of the idea that there is an individual is liberation. So there's a sort of segue back to liberation from the idea of karma. Right. Whew. I feel like I talked really fast there, and I hadn't even had a coffee this morning. We're at the 20-minute mark of the brief dialogue, which is about where I like to keep my brief dialogues brief, so to speak. Thank you for listening. Comments welcome. We'll speak to you soon.